If people online can hear me, can they give a thumbs up? They can. Julia's going to come and take over. I think so. Ambi, they can hear. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first seminar in the African Stars program for this year. I think everyone knows me, so I'm not going to introduce myself on the program. So this is the first of, I think, about 7 or 8 seminars you're going to get. And we're looking forward to telling you some of the stories about some of the different areas. And we have a very interesting topic today. And we have 3 very interesting speakers. The purpose of today's session is really to kick us off in the seminar series. And we've got an old friend and colleague, less on the old, but more on the friend and the colleague. Glaudina Loots from the South African government. And a lot of the STARS fellows interested in drugs, diagnostics, vaccines, you're going to need government support. And understanding how many of the programs in Africa rely on government support to get going. Somebody's going to have to buy your products. Somebody's going to have to give regulatory approvals. Somebody's going to offer tax incentives for your products. And you need to know that landscape before you go into there. The last thing you want to do is suddenly invest in a really cool idea and then realize that no one can buy it because you're not compliant with government policy, or you're trying to export and you don't have the right kind of paperwork in place. And really the government's role in enabling a developed bioeconomy. We're then going to pivot to a very nice success story from South Africa in drug discovery, H3D, which really spun out of an initiative of the government with a lot of support from government, setting up a center. And now they are a household brand in many parts of the world, not just in Africa, and delivering drugs for the African market. And Susan's going to talk about the H3D Foundation, which is a spin-off again from H3D. So first up, Glaudina Loots from the Department of Science and Innovation, or Technology, or whatever it's called this year. And I'm going to talk about the role that governments play in underpinning and building a bioeconomy. And then we will jump into, and we'll keep questions to the end if that's okay, everyone.
I want to share to do the slides. Yeah. Good afternoon. Just sort of checking the faces. I know a couple of faces there on that side. I'm Glaudina Loots, the Director for Health Innovation at the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And why Richard has said, because they keep on changing the name every 2 years. So yeah. So I'm just going to take you through a quick journey of where we are and what we are doing. And this is also what we are encouraging other African countries to start looking into. So at the moment, one of the, for example, we are advising Rwanda on what systems should be in place and so on. So, but yeah. So where we started is to see how do we approach it in South Africa. It starts with the constitution that everybody has a right to healthcare access. Then we looked at the burden of disease in South Africa. It is different from the burden of disease in the rest of Africa because of the large HIV and TB component, but also a large non-communicable disease component in South Africa. We looked at economic opportunities, your development goals, our own national development plan, international research collaborations, and then the fact that we do have world-class researchers such as Julio and Richard, and good organizers like this, Richard. And then we looked at the drivers of health innovation. And what is, the drivers of health innovation. What is interesting is Dr. Google is an entity that we have to take into account whenever you start developing new treatments, vaccines, ways of dealing with patients, because what we've seen, for example, and what is happening in the United States is the vast drive of access to healthcare based on not necessarily science. That is becoming, it's not only in the United States, but it's a reality in South Africa. We do have, for example, a decline in the vaccination of children as a result of the misconceptions that is being spread via the internet, social media platforms. And it is something that you actually need to, when you design products and design access programs, that you actually have to start taking it. So there's the patient awareness component, but then there's the whole digitization of health and healthcare. And how do you bring that into whatever you want to do? And keep that in mind. Then one of the problems that we have is the unsustainable cost of healthcare services, the new products that's coming out, the new drugs that's coming out. We can't really afford it, so we need to start looking at what is the best way then forward. And then on my way here, I was actually part of a discussion with a global fund and the European Union to start looking to what extent um, funds can be made available to assist Africa with the HIV drugs and so on. And it's a very tough life out there. Money is not as easy as it was 10 years ago, and we need to start looking at, yes, you can have a wonderful product, but is it cost effective? Will it make that much of a change that you can actually, in the end, drive the cost of healthcare services down? And on top of all of that, we do have a rapid evolution in science. One of the projects that I'm busy working with is the use of CAR-T technologies for cancer treatments in South Africa, and to what extent the price of that can be driven down. But it also has got the ability to start looking at potential of a HIV cure. But that's the latest technologies, and to what extent does it really make sense in the area where you are operating? And what are the different steps that you need to take through that? Now, one of the interesting things is the convergence of technologies of your nanobiosocial. That is one of the major things that's actually driving any health innovations, whether it's a drug, a vaccine, a new mobile device, it all goes around. And if you do not play within this convergence, where you're looking at your fourth industrial revolution, the need of the patients, the healthcare need, the needs of the healthcare service providers, as the social components, the IT components, all of that, if you do not take that into cognizance when you start looking at what products, then you will have a serious uphill. But if you play this correctly, by the cost savings that can be built into that, you can look at more cost-effective healthcare services, new ways of the drug delivery or healthcare delivery, utilizing your ICT, but also the latest nanotechnology drug delivery. And automatically that will filter down to a better service for the patients and how we can actually make healthcare more accessible. When I start looking at health, the question that I always ask, and Richard can testify to that, is fine, you've got this new technology. How will it improve the situation of the woman who took her last money, take a taxi to get to a clinic, if it does not address that need? So when you start looking at health in a way, look at it from a patient perspective. What are you actually doing to address the needs? If it's just a fancy new technology that's sitting at a university hospital, you can't get to the clinic. There's no answer to that. So that is the basic principles. Now, from South Africa, I'm talking too much, Richard, I know. Uh, from South Africa, what we've done, we've developed the 10-year innovation plan. Within that, we're looking at health innovation, at your support for research, and I will talk about that. Then looking at your development of therapeutics diagnostics. So H3Ds was one of our first successful projects that looking into actually how do you build the network inside both the abilities. And then we're looking at the use of your ICT component. So in South Africa, the major component is looking at food treatments and prevention technologies. So it's not only treatments, not only drugs, but how do we prevent diseases? I think the mRNA hub is actually quite a good example of that, as well as some of the work that's done at using digital technologies. There's actually a call out on the moment for AI, and to what extent can we start bringing in AI in drug discovery, but also in drug delivery systems. And then finally, we have embarked on a 110,000 human project. We are precision medicine program that's tailor-made for the not for individuals, but actually population-based. Because on the moment, a lot of the drugs that's still being developed do not take in. Only 4% of the genome databases at the African genome. So we are now working with various African countries to see how we can build up that population base, but also in a way that it is fair to the African population. So what we created to start off this whole thing is what we call the Strategic Health Innovation Partnerships. So it's between government, the Medical Research Council, and various funders. Then that join, we look at what are the research questions that needs to be answered, and we actually take it through the whole process, not the basic science, but once you've got the basic science, you can on the further applied science and how you take it through, right through to manufacturing. What are all the steps that need to be put into place, and where can we then assist? This is just to show how where the funding is coming from. Those are all government instruments that we are using in order to take it further. And once you get to commercial, Department of Trade and Industry of South Africa, then they are on the moment looking at what incentives can we then look for local manufacturing. So just to show you, this is actually the different stages. And Richard, this can be made available. The different stages, because this is what is driving health innovation. And it is being internationally recognized, a very good model. And we are working with the World Health Organization to actually start rolling this out and to make people more aware of what you need to do. So it's just sort of from our side, so it's treatment, diagnosis, prevention, digital health, precision medicine, and then trust is then specifically the burden of disease in South Africa. We've learned our lessons during COVID, and we're now building the abilities to then take it further. CERI is one of the other good example that we can. So just to sort of show what has happened from shift, and I think Richard is when you the manager. We've got relationships with Gates Foundation, a very strong one with that, where they are complementary to what we are doing. Ask Susan how the two actually, South African government and shift Gates work together. Newton Fund, Innovate UK, PATH, as the Medical Innovation Technology Agency from South Africa, and then the Genomics, that is where we also have the infrastructure component around all the genomics. How all of this, by having these players managed by one group, can actually get to where we can. And we've doubled, no, tripled the funding that came into from the South African government by having all these other role players into. What is very, very, very important is when you start looking at funders, they do not give handouts. They want to know what are you as a government or organization putting out as well. And that is one of the models that we are using for the EDC I'm also the vice chair, and we've just approved what we call the in-kind um, contributions for the African countries. Because we understand, yes, you cannot put the equivalent kind of money that 10 countries are putting, but the buildings, the systems that are in place, the co-funding of projects, and that is a model that using for other research, acknowledging them of so just what we then did is we actually look across South Africa. Now we said we've got all of these potential diagnostics, potential drugs, and so on. What do we do around it? What we then created for your medical devices and diagnostics, created this cluster. As you will see, there is research. How do we explain to them that? So it's literally whoever is playing in medical devices and that's part of this. We bring them, have meetings. What are the main problems? So is that our regulatory authority, SAPRA, could not manage what was funded, IT system. So we then go through what is needed. So we need new diagnostics. Who can do it? During COVID, we actually were able to use the system, and within a very short period, half of the costs that we got. Because we could whole system is. And so just on the pharmaceutical side, on the drug side, exactly. Or drug discovery. Facility where you can upscale from or university liters of large animal. Moment still struggling to go beyond 200 liters. So taking that forward. But this is what you do. Says, and as the sorry. Um, so so what is important is that you also bring together all of these people with a specific purpose and not try to play up the one against the other, but rather from a collaborative approach, how can we do what to get that together? Now that is the last one. That is the flagship on the moment on the vaccine side in South Africa was actually the mRNA hub, but it's just a demonstration also of what can be done. During COVID, we were promised that we will get a tech transfer from Moderna for the COVID vaccine. We're still waiting. Being problem solvers, we got this consortium together. As you can see there at the bottom, we got the consortium together that consists of manufacturers as well as researchers, as well as pathogen genomic surveillance people, literally with a full spectrum of what you need to develop a vaccine. The COVID vaccine did not end up in clinical trials, not for the fact that it's not working, but for the fact that it's not needed anymore. But that same technology is now South African developed with assistance from NIH as well as Drew Weissman. But the basic technology is developed in South Africa, and we are sharing that on the moment with 15 other companies across the world. And we've given them specific, South Africa is concentrating on HIV, TB, Rift Valley fever, gonorrhea, but it's literally, we've divided it. You concentrate on this because that's an area that's important to you. I know that Fiocruz is looking at Zika and the chikungunya and the things that's important for that area. So it's literally divided on where, here's the technology, this is how to do it, this is where you find the specific inserts that you need to put into the DNA, and then to actually get through the whole process. So that process development is also being shared then with 15 countries across the world. So this is what we suggest for everybody. Do not keep your stuff for yourself, share it. Yes, the way that you share it, and be more of a, let's look at not totally open science, but science for the people and not science for my pocket. And this is one of the flagships and how to do this and how we actually could do that. It's very important lessons from it. So as next thing that we did is the drug substance manufacturing. Then from that triggered the fact that we could make this mRNA vaccine, triggered then the need to actually upscale our facilities where you do the manufacturing of vaccines. And that is not cheap to actually do that. But now we're in the final stages. And for example, BioVac is doing the oral cholera vaccine for Africa. That is being part of the wider Gavi funding. And once they are now into phase 1-3 trials, and once that is done, the cholera vaccine for Africa will be made by Africans in Africa. So that is what we're doing. But then the important thing is we realize that there's a need to actually take beyond just students in universities, but actually how do you manufacture and what is the actual process, and then biopharmaceutical workforce training hub has been created, and that is also again shared across Africa with our colleagues to say this is the processes that you need to go.
Thank you, Glaudina. That's a great way to kick us off. And I think the key messages to take out of there is that these things just didn't happen by themselves with things coming together. It was deliberate interventions by government feeding back and investing strategically in the key things to fill the gaps. And you're now going to see a real case example. The questions are going to come at the end, guys. Sorry, we did say that at the beginning, but that's the only way I can keep you guys to time. And if you do run over time, I will stand up. So we're now going to hear the HVD story. This was very much an example of how the government got involved in facilitating what they called in those days DSI research chairs. And this is a research chair in drug discovery. So maybe it's easiest if you use the mic.
Thanks, Richard. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today to represent my colleagues from the University of Cape Town, and Glaudina's provided a very nice overview of the health innovation ecosystem here in South Africa. And so now we're going to kind of do a deep dive, a bit of a case study into the H3D story as we talk about making new medicines. That's what drug discovery is. H3D, holistic drug discovery and development. It's a long, complicated, intricate path to make a new medicine. And so what we pride ourselves on doing at H3D is really addressing all of these aspects of the drug discovery value chain. That's why it's holistic or integrated drug discovery. I thought I would start off, though, with a biochemical equation. If you're quick at maths, you can work out how old I am. But yeah, when I give these talks, I like to just show at least a few molecular structures. That's caffeine, if you're wondering, an important catalyst. But especially if there are students online, I thought it would be quite nice just to kind of show the journey as well, and also how we train a lot of scientists here in South Africa, but we can importantly, or we're building capacity to retain them as well, so we don't have a brain drain situation. I was very lucky to study at UCT, chemistry and biochemistry, PhD in chemistry, and then did a postdoc in biochemistry and spent a lot of time, in fact, across the road in your biochemistry department, also part of this building complex, I think. But then I joined H3D as a postdoctoral fellow in medicinal chemistry and really enjoyed this interface of chemistry, biochemistry, computational chemistry, pharmacology, biology, and doing meaningful work as well, which is why I've stayed on at H3D at UCT as a research officer. So some participation quiz. How many clinical candidates, i.e. compounds, molecules that show promise as a new treatment for a disease and may now undergo human trials, have been discovered, developed, or made here in Africa on our continent? Got some choices: 0, 1, a few more than that, many more than that. I hope we'll get to that point. Who says 0? Good. That's not the right answer. Who says 1? Who says more than that? Maybe. So the answer, regrettably, is 1. We have a lot of work to do, but it also shows that we can do it, and it can be done here on our continent. This particular molecule is called MMV390048. It's progressed to phase 2 clinical trials for malaria in Ethiopia. We did the phase 1 first in human trial here in South Africa at UCT, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as an applicational case study of the drug discovery we're doing at H3D. But before we get into our nitty-gritty of what we do at H3D, I think it is just important to think about why we do what we do. Why do we need new medicines in the first place? Why are the medicines that we have at the moment not sufficient? And there should be a big word starting with an R that immediately comes to mind when one thinks of medicines, biology, evolution, pathogens, and that's resistance, drug resistance. Over time, all of our drugs become less effective, less efficacious, and so we constantly need a pipeline of new potential drugs to replace those that the bugs are out evolving, out developing resistance to. Where do new medicines come from? One sadly can't always just go digging about in the dirt or extracting them from plants or animal products. Nature is a very important starting point for new medicines, but mostly these days they are made and optimized in the lab. So that's what we do at H3D. And I'm going to ask you in a few moments what your ideal medicine would look like. When we are making a new medicine, what sort of things do we need to think about? And then finally, just a bit more the nitty-gritty, what we actually do at H3D and how we fit into this broad health innovation ecosystem and value chain. How do we actually make these new medicines, get them, as we like to say, from the bench to the bedside? Or, use for acronyms like that. Okay, this is a projection of the globe. You can see Africa constitutes 15 to 20% of our land area. Total population, probably about the same, although you can see India and China are very large as well. But when it comes to skewing this map now for communicable disease dailies, so those are disability adjusted life years, that is one metric for evaluating disease burden, you can see that Africa has the overwhelming burden when it comes to infectious or communicable diseases like malaria, for example. So this is one of the reasons why we need to do drug discovery here in Africa, as Glaudina said so nicely, for Africans, by Africans in Africa. And that was the primary motivation for the start of H3D. How do we make new medicines? Okay, last structures, almost, I think. But these are from the periodic table. These, as chemists, as scientists, are our molecular toolkits, how we actually make these new medicines. Are you familiar with these elements? Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, very occasionally these guys as well, are also important. The problem is chemical space is vast. If you want to make a new molecule or a medicine, there are too many options, and you need to have a much better, more efficient way of narrowing down those molecular possibilities. And so that then takes us to drug discovery and development. How do we, in a very resource-constrained setting, think about how to make new medicines? But just to give you some idea of, these are 4 of the 50 drugs that were approved by the Food and Drug Administration in the USA in 2021. You'll see, okay, these are almost the last molecular structures. Now, they are quite different. Yeah, if you just had to sit down and draw a molecule, there's a lot of diversity, and we need a much more sort of systematic way of narrowing down what a potential drug-like molecule could be. Of course, people have looked at drugs that have come onto the market, where they've come from. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, nature, natural products really are still a very important source of inspiration. A lot of molecules or medicines have come from wholly synthetic libraries, maybe from large-scale screening operations. But really, once again, one needs this healthy balance of creativity. You're obviously constrained by the laws of nature, but then serendipity, or good luck, is also important as well. So one also needs to position oneself in a space where one is not just following the rules or letting AI do all the work these days. There needs to be a balance in between. So what does an ideal medicine look like when we at H3D sit down and decide we're going to develop the new medicine for malaria or for TB or against antimicrobial resistance? What are some of those characteristics? Yes, please. Absolutely. What do you mean by safe? Yes, as few and as tolerable side effects as possible. Safe enough, yes. Obviously, it's always going to be a balance between, yeah, risk and reward, or harm and benefit. Good. What else? Yeah, so oral administration is maybe the way many of us prefer to take our medicines. What are other forms of administration? Intravenous injection. We don't all like injections, and often that requires specialized kind of healthcare staff to administer those. So that could be a limitation if you want to administer a medicine in a resource-constrained area. Good. What else? What about things like affordability? You want your medicine to be as accessible as possible. Do you want to take it over and over again, or just once? A single dose cure might be first prize. Anything else? Yes, absolutely. Vulnerable population, or pregnant women, perhaps, depending on what it is. So there's so much to think about when developing a new medicine. Safe, selective. You want it just to be doing what you want it to do, and not other things. Lots of things to think about. And so when we start off a drug discovery project, we'll think very carefully about what we want that final medicine to look like, our, if you like, the target product profile of that medicine, and really thinking carefully about, okay, which disease are we targeting? Of course, for us here in Africa, those that disproportionately affect population here on this continent. How are we going to administer that medicine, and things like safety, tolerability, stability. If it's going to be distributed in warm or humid environments, we need something that's going to be able to withstand, be chemically stable in those conditions. It has to, how does it compare to existing therapies? Ideally, something that is better than the current standard of care, and so on. So lots to think about. And this is one way of representing then the drug discovery pipeline or value chain. If we just zoom into the very early stages of that innovation health innovation value chain that Glaudina showed us a bit earlier. There's often a lot of pre-discovery work going on in biology, chemistry, understanding pathogen biology, how the malaria parasite is transmitted, for example. And then all this work in the drug discovery and preclinical phase that I'll zoom into over the next few slides, all the medicinal chemistry, all the computational work, really understanding, well, in what chemical space do we have to move if we need to make a molecule that is going to target a particular enzyme or pathway, with the goal maybe to kill that pathogen in order to provide a cure to the patients who are taking that medicine. And then we ultimately get to human trials, clinical developments, and if you're very, very lucky, a new medicine at the end of the chain. But you can see here, it takes a long time, too long. It's too expensive as well. And there's massive attrition or loss along the way. Yeah? Look at that. You might start off with tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of compounds. You're whittling down over time, funneling down. If you're lucky, 100 or 200 compounds that go into in vivo, so that's in whole organism, maybe in small mammal models like mice and rats. If you're lucky, a very small number of those compounds will enter the clinic. And if you're very, very lucky, one will go all the way. Of course, there's a lot of hype that AI might be able to help us. Can it make things more efficient, to be done cheaper over shorter timeframes? Maybe chat about that a little bit later. But a lot of the work we do at H3D is at this early stage, what we call the discovery phase of the drug discovery and development value chain. So maybe just to zoom in quickly before we talk more specifically about H3D, really just to give you a nitty-gritty overview of how we identify those promising drug-like molecules. And they'll typically start with what we call screening and hit identification. So how do we find an attractive starting point for molecular optimization or drug discovery? And for this, one may look at tens or hundreds of thousands of compounds, and you then go through all the data analysis, making sure you're not picking up false positives, really finding something, because you're now going to invest a lot of time and money in this molecule, this scaffold, this chemical series. You want to make sure you're making the right choice. And if you think you find something promising, you can then go into the hit to lead or lead optimization stages. And really, this is all medicinal chemistry, working very, very closely with computational experts, pharmacologists, biologists, guided by what we call structure-activity relationship studies. When I change the molecular structure, how is the activity of that molecule changing? And the screening cascade, which are all the experiments you'll want to do in order to progress a molecule, hopefully, to preclinical development, which is before we get into human patients now, where you need to build up a very good case that your molecule is as safe as it can possibly be and as effective or efficacious as it can possibly be before we go into human trials, which, as you can see also from the numbers, is a very long, unpredictable process. And so many drug discovery projects fail before they get to the clinic or when they are finally in clinical trials. And can we really make sure that we've taken all the measures and steps we can to use our limited resources well to make sure we can get a new molecule to go all the way? And that's why we only have one so far, at least one that went into clinical trials on this continent. But as you'll hear from Susan after me, there's reason to think or be optimistic that a few more might be on their way quite soon. This is just another way of showing just how many disciplines are involved in drug discovery, and again, why at H3D, holistic or integrated drug discovery is the way to go. So you can see there from screening and hit identification, lots of biology, computational, if you're lucky, robotics, automated screening is first prize. And then all the work that's involved in the hit to lead, lead optimization, preclinical studies, modeling, biologists, the animal work, all of these things, and ultimately also process chemistry, being able to scale things up, as Glaudina mentioned, to be able to make many thousands of liters or kilograms of the material that you hope to go into trials. So H3D celebrates its 15th birthday this year, and we are embedded within the University of Cape Town, and our vision is to be a leading organization globally for integrated drug discovery and development. And of course, our first and primary mission is the one I've been talking about. How do we discover and develop innovative, so those are new, we don't just want to piggyback on the work that's already been done, life-saving medicines for infectious diseases that disproportionately affect our continents. But then we also need to think very carefully, and Glaudina mentioned this a little bit earlier, building Africa-specific models to contribute to improving treatment outcomes in African patients. And what do I mean by that? We are all genetically different. We are all going to respond differently to medicines. Some of us may metabolize or break down a medicine really quickly, in which case we will need to take more of it or more frequently in order to get the therapeutic dose that we need. Some of us may break down the same medicine much more slowly. Now, if we're taking regular and high doses of that molecule, that means it's going to build up to a toxic level in our body if we are not able to break it down, metabolize, or clear it as quickly. And so what we really need is a personalized medicine approach where we are able to give you a dose of a medicine that we know is going to work according to your particular diet, your genetic makeup. This has not been done very well globally yet, and certainly not in Africa, where we have enormous genetic heterogeneity. And so H3D is leading the way in trying to build models to understand how we metabolize and respond to existing medicines, for example, so that we can build those observations into our projects as we tailor medicines for our own people. Developing the drug discovery platform technologies I'll mention in just a moment, and then very importantly, training African scientists in the work we do to build our ecosystem across the continent. So just some snapshots. You can see H3D is about 70 or 80 staff members strong, most of whom have an advanced postgrad degree. We have drug discovery programs in 3 infectious disease areas. I've mentioned them already: malaria, TB, and antimicrobial resistance, because that is globally an enormous problem that Big Pharma is really disinvesting in at the moment. And someone's got to do something about it. Otherwise, we're all going to be in trouble in a few decades' time. And as I mentioned, we had this first-in-class anti-malarial that went to phase 2 trials. And as we heard also from Glaudina, it's all about relationships and networks. And so we're very proud of the ecosystem that we've built up. And if you're interested in learning a bit more, and obviously happy to share this with you afterwards, but Susan and I and Professor Chibale, our founder and director at H3D, wrote this comment in Nature Medicine a few years ago, just distilling some of the lessons we've learned and how best to go about, from our own experience, doing drug discovery in Africa. Sorry about some of the fonts. These platform technologies I mentioned are really important, how we actually do drug discovery. So we do the medicinal chemistry and the computer-aided drug discovery or drug design, AI and machine learning, on our upper campus at the University of Cape Town, and then on our health sciences campus, all the drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics, that's the DMPK work, whether that's in vitro, in petri dishes, in vivo, in animals, or modeling, pharmacometrics, and then all the biology as well. So all the screening that we do, understanding how small molecules interact with their drug targets via our enzymology. And then, of course, we want to make sure it's safe as well. So we cross-screen all our compounds against mammalian cells just to make sure that we are targeting just the pathogen and not our healthy human cells. And of course, all underpinned by robust data storage and sample management systems, also so we can train our machine learning models as well based on our own data. We're part of a very, very large network of collaborators and 2 very important global consortia in these disease areas, the TB Drug Accelerator Program and the Malaria Drug Accelerator. And this makes sure that we are all coordinating and we are not duplicating efforts, and that if there is expertise from other institutions, that can feed into our programs and vice versa. So just to give you an overview of our specific scientific programs at H3D, and you can see there are major funding sources. I mentioned malaria and TB are our flagship programs and the nascent or growing areas in antimicrobial resistance. And then just to mention another important part of our health innovation value chain or ecosystem is actually making these APIs, these active pharmaceutical ingredients. It is a massive problem, as you all know, that we import almost all of our medicines from India, from China. What happens when the next pandemic comes around and supply chains are interrupted again? So we really need to build the capacity to produce our own medicines on the continent. I'm not talking about now discovering and developing them, but scaling them up, making them on scale. And so we have a pilot project at H3D in the context of antiretrovirals for H3D. The technology platforms I mentioned earlier, and then just very quickly mentioning that I think something that's very special about H3D, I mentioned we're embedded within the University of Cape Town network, is that we're also closely aligned to the academic program of the university still. So Kelly Chibale, our founder and director, he still maintains an academic research group. And the idea is to have very constructive interplay between these two entities. So if, let's say, at H3D, a drug discovery project becomes less attractive or it fails for some reason, that could still become a very useful postgraduate project. And then one of his students could take that on. And vice versa, if we have, let's say, a PhD project that looks really, really promising, and we now want to give it kind of prime time drug discovery resources and focus, that can move over to H3D. And so once again, this also feeds into our program of training and building a sustainable pipeline of scientists at H3D. And this just gives you a snapshot of some of the projects in the academic group that support the drug discovery enterprise and programs, but that are not always, focused towards making those new medicines, which is the main goal of H3D. And so here is the compound that made it all the way to the clinic, or at least to clinical trials, MMV390048. And what was very exciting about this is, besides being the first clinical candidate to be discovered on this continent, it had the potential to be used as a single dose cure, which you'll remember I mentioned earlier is really what we're looking for. It's like gold standard or first prize. It was active across all stages of the malaria parasite life cycle. And you all know the parasite has a very complex life cycle that's shared between the human host and the mosquito vector. And what was exciting is that this particular molecule inhibited an enzyme, a lipid kinase called the PI4 kinase, the phosphatidyl inositol 4 kinase. And what is exciting about that drug target is that it's expressed at all stages of the malaria parasite life cycle, the liver stage, the red blood cell stage, and controls transmission to the mosquito vector, so that if you're able to inhibit that particular enzyme, you're able to block transmission, you're able to really kill the parasite at all stages of its life cycle. And then we did the first in human study at UCT as well, and went into phase 2 trials in Ethiopia shortly after that. I'm also a musician in my other life, and so I really like this way of thinking about drug discovery as being a very collaborative enterprise, like an orchestra. All the different disciplines engaging and interacting and sharing with one another, but one ultimately needs a conductor, someone who's going to bring all the musicians, all the scientists together, and that really is what the medicinal chemist does. And really just to drive home again the interdisciplinarity of what we do at so many different levels as medicinal chemists working with computational chemists, our biologists, enzymologists, both in vitro and in vivo work, thinking about what the drug does to the body, what the body does to the drug. You can start to get a sense now of why this is so difficult and why up till now, maybe we haven't really had the capacity and vision to build an integrated drug discovery hub on our continent yet. Modeling, genetics, all the omics work, and then ways to show how all these disciplines are engaging with one another, and then ultimately scaling everything up, getting it out into trials amongst many thousands of patients to see, have we now developed something that is efficacious and safe? And then maybe just a last word on how we're leveraging AI at H3D. So how can we use computational tools to make this whole process, and certainly what we do, more effective and efficient? So we have ways in which we are asking the computer to suggest which are the most sensible next molecules to make and how we can make them so that we can use our resources as effectively as possible. And we're quite excited, again, really kind of laying groundwork for these are all open source models as well, open that anyone can use as well, especially our collaborators across the continent. Just to give you a sense of the sorts of publications coming from H3D, not just the hardcore science, but also really thought leadership and thinking about how we can build our scientific ecosystems across the continent. Some big challenges, opportunities, Susan will touch on some of these now, and some questions as well. How can we do the work we do more efficiently? How can we incorporate and reflect African data into our decision making? And then to pave the way for Susan, how can we now nurture and sustain, build this ecosystem across the continent? Thanks very much.
Very much, John. It was very, very interesting. And I think at the end of that, you can see that I think to get one drug to the market, I think requires the interactive collaboration between 38 different disciplines. So it's not chemistry, they just make the compounds, guys. I'm a chemist as well, so I can say that. They're biology, pharmacists, pharmacologists, clinicians, manufacturers, the whole shebang. So that's a great way to start us off. Thank you very much, John. We're going to come to questions later, but just in interest of time. A bit of a shout out. There's about 50 of us in the room here in Stellenbosch, but there's about 120 people online who've been listening. So the people online, thank you very much for joining. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and then Ambi's going to read them to us at the end. So hopefully Susan's going to talk for 20 minutes, and then we're going to have 10 minutes of questions at the end. So please keep your questions to the end, but thank you. That's a great way to start.
Thanks, Richard. I can talk for as long or as short as you like. 20 minutes. Cool. Yes, so John and Glaudina have really paved the way. You've heard about how the South African government really created that ecosystem to support the start of H3D. And then in 2010, that's when our center started. That's when Professor Kelly Chibali got formal approval from the university to start a center. It took a few years before we really got staff coming in and we started to build what we were doing. And you can already see some of the success stories coming out of H3D. So what next and where to from here? I'm going to talk a little bit about the H3D Foundation. Now, this is really what came out of the H3D Center. It's our not-for-profit that we put in place to really say, well, we're doing it in Cape Town, but how do we expand this across the continent? What are the next steps to really create other centers like this to really start to nurture this need? I think, John, your picture of the disease burden in Africa is a very powerful way of saying we need to be doing the work here. H3D cannot be the only drug discovery center on the continent. We need more. And how are we going to support and nurture this ecosystem until we actually become a self-sustaining, vibrant, innovative pharmaceutical industry? So in 2019, just before COVID, great timing to start something, we decided we wanted to set up this not-for-profit and say, how can we build on everything we'd been doing at H3D, which had been focused on training scientists for the center itself? How can we build on that to really now start to expand our work? Our vision is this absorptive capacity for securing, building, and retaining skilled African scientists. We recognize that there's a lot of really good quality training that's happening on the continent, but the bulk of our scientists are actually then going to work in the US, in Europe. They're leaving. They're not staying here. So if we continue investing in the training, but we don't invest in actually creating capacity to do the work here, we're going to perpetuate this problem. Our vision is to see what we can do to coordinate in the space and unlock the potential for a real sustainable drug discovery and development environment. And all three of us, so this is Professor Kelly Chibali, myself, and our head of finance, and the three of us are all employed at the H3D Center, and we're the directors of this foundation to now start to catalyze and build outwards. So what does that mean? And how are we going to go about doing this? It's a nice idea. Let's have other centers like this. How can we here in Cape Town start to catalyze this? I thought one of the big gaps was you need a convening platform and a credible voice around global health views. This was also, remember that the year that we were putting this all together was during COVID, when misinformation was rife, where people weren't trusting what they were hearing. How do we build trust in African medicines, build trust in the quality on the continent, build trust that we can actually do it here, and start putting forward strong messages? Some of the publications John just showed is aligned with this. We're saying, well, let's create this case. Let's put out information, not just to the scientific community, but more broadly, get the voice out that we can do this on the continent and we should be doing it here. We want to work to strengthen the capacity and capability development within Africa. We also want to unlock and leverage infrastructure development. We want to advocate very strongly for science for job creation. If people do not see career paths in science, they are not going to study science. We're seeing this as a really big problem, particularly in even schools in South Africa, where the students are not actually even taking science through to matric. They're dropping out of science early because they don't see a career path. When they look at the jobs available, science is not there. We need to create a really strong narrative that science is here. We can have jobs. We can use this to boost our economy. It's not a waste of time and resources. This is a powerful mechanism to move Africa forward. And then, of course, promoting engagement between scientists and communities. If we're not engaging with the communities, we're never going to get that support for what we're doing. A whole tangential topic is around how many of our African patients are actually using so-called Western medicines. And if we develop a drug in the lab, is it going to be chosen over their grandmother's tincture that's been passed on for generations? How do we start to build trust in this and engage with the communities to make sure that whatever treatments they are using are safe and are effective? Okay, so in terms of what we do at the HUD Foundation, we've split it into 4 strategic pillars. I'm only going to talk about the first 2 today, but I wanted to give you a bigger sense of what we're doing. So the first is really on capacity strengthening. That's how do we really focus on the scientists first and build their capacity to do the work. Then we're working on network building. We have some strategic projects. The strategic projects are really to identify critical gaps in what's taking place in the continent and how can we put boosts in place to support the work. And then community engagement, which is for us, it's a growing area. So there are a few initiatives in here, but as I said, I'm not going to mention these two too much this morning. Okay, so what do we do to strengthen capacity? So one of the ways that we've been using is through scientific fellowships. For scientists, it's very important to get exposure to different labs for multiple different reasons. You can see a picture. We've got 2 of our postdoc fellows actually from University of Cape Town. We sent them to the US for training with an international partner. So really looking at our scientists here, can we give them exposure to labs across the world and then get them to come back and implement what they've learned? Always interesting to note, the grass is not always greener on the other side. Our scientists came back and said, they don't even have their own NMR machine there. You know, what we've got here is even better. But they get exposed to different scientists. They're building their network. They're learning new things and they're bringing it back. The other thing that we're doing is we're saying, well, we have established this HUD Drug Discovery Center. How do we really create a hub for supporting the other researchers in Africa? And just over the last 3 years, we have hosted 27 fellowships from 6 different African countries. These are scientists coming to H3D, being in our project team, seeing how we do things, working on their own projects for the most part, and then going back and implementing new things in their own labs and training when they return as well. So this is an area you're essentially becoming these hubs and opening up the labs across the continent for sharing knowledge. Okay, so that's the one way we're doing it. The next topic is mentorship. And we have a really fantastic mentorship program. To date, we've had 120 mentees in our program. We're on iteration 5 at the moment. And through this, what we're doing is we're matching up emerging researchers with industry experts working at pharmaceutical companies. Some of them are retired, some of them are consultants, but we have a really strong network of mentors, world-class scientists, then engaging one-on-one with these emerging researchers and helping them in different ways. And people talk about mentorship a lot. I thought that the easiest way to convey the power and the value of the program is actually to put some quotes from our latest cohort. So you can see what are the mentees themselves actually getting out of a structured program like this. And so the first quote, I'm going to read them to you because it's powerful to see how that one-on-one interaction can really have this catalytic effect for that individual and for their career. The first person says, I learned how to get in contact with researchers across the world, how to get in touch with host labs, how to design and conduct a research project, how to end it, how to collaborate with people in the same area of research, and how to publish in journals. That's a lot of learning going on just with one-on-one meetings over the course of a year with one mentor and mentee. Next example, I also really love because with a good mentor, they're not just talking at their mentees. This is an example of when he'd explain a concept and then he'd say to his mentee, tell me back, what did you learn? He would ask if I understood the concept, encourage me to explain it, and then if he made mistakes, would gently press towards a greater understanding. That's really having someone listening and checking that you fundamentally understand the concepts that we're pursuing here. Another example, my interactions with my mentor provided better insights into project progression and the ideas of how to support the project more effectively. We also discussed developing a proposal together, which was actually submitted for funding. We're still waiting to hear back, but this could be another success story coming out of here. Another example, my mentor helped me in communicating with my boss and colleagues and how to deal with work issues. This was a great help. how could I survive in a research institute with poor communication skills? And these are some of the real problems on the ground. If we're going to help our scientists become leaders, we have to help them holistically and address all these different things. You can see the photos that I've picked at the bottom. We are able to have an in-person interaction with our mentees and mentors earlier this year. And this just is showcasing some of our peers. And it was really rewarding to see them meet for the first time and the real friendships that had formed from these online engagements. So it just gives you an example of some of our peers. Okay, so we also asked them a question in the closeout survey to give us tangible impact. What difference did it really make to you, this one-year program where you had this opportunity to meet with a mentor? So the one mentor shared that her mentee was actually so inspired by the skills that she was taught that she applied and received a $10,000 grant to pass those same skills on to more women in her community. So immediately saying, I want to magnify, I want to share this. There's another very, very science-heavy pair that actually worked together on a collaborative project during this program, and they published and formed the basis of a grant application from the work they did together. Someone else, through the mentorship program, was introduced to researchers at another university, which was highly relevant for them building on their own long-term career goals. Another mentor, and this is one of the key jobs of the mentor, at our first meeting suggested that I leave my comfort zone and explore other areas. This advice had a big impact on my research objective and career. I followed her advice and collaborated with one of my colleagues with an expertise in whatever, and they actually got a grant proposal awarded through this. So it was just that one-on-one push to, you can do it, break out of that, form that connection and move. Our mentorship led to several practical outcomes: improved internal project tracking systems and presentations, co-review of my performance agreement and CV, support for webinars. My mentors network also provided valuable introductions and a visa support letter, which were instrumental in a global job search. And our conversations helped align my work with global standards and build confidence during a key career transition. Another example of a mentorship was tangible in obtaining a grant and with scientific research project in progress. And another example where the mentor really helped and actually successfully landed a new job through this. There are lots more, but I think the point is that mentorship, it's not just a buzzword. And for that individual who is on the receiving end, it can be a really powerful way to fast track their career, to help them build these networks, and to establish the confidence to actually move forward into scientific leadership. And what I also love about the anecdotes that we hear is you frequently hear that our mentors sitting in the US, sitting in Europe, sitting all over, they gain so much from the program as well, learning about what it means to do research in Africa and also learning about the potential for collaborations. So watch the space. I think mentorship is something that needs to grow, and this is really, it's one of those powerful compounding techniques that we can use to boost what we're doing. The other thing that we do is drug discovery workshops. So where we can, we get people together for workshops, not just like this one. You know, you get people in person from all over the world, get them working together, focused on something, and really learning in an intense way for about 4 to 5 days. And we've had 8 really great workshops to date, most of them in Cape Town, but we realized that we're going to hit broader markets or different markets if we're able to host them in other locations. So last year we were able to host one in Accra, and then this year we hosted one in Nairobi as well, which really helps the geographical distribution. We've had 252 participants go through our workshops with 10 African countries involved to date. And then, of course, if it's expensive to get people in person, you say to yourself, well, how do I reach a broader audience? And this is where the online training comes in. We know it's not as effective, but you are able to reach so many more people. So together with Merck Global Health, we put together an open online course on Coursera, which is Introduction to Small Molecule Drug Discovery. Pleased to say we've had, in the last year and a half, we've had about almost 1,400 course completions on there. And these are people who are getting certificates at the end of the program. Much higher rate of course, enrollments and people just looking at particular sections. Last week, we ran an AI machine learning tools for drug discovery webinar series. We actually had 440 people enroll for this week-long webinar series, and 250 people completed all the assignments and will be getting certificates in the near future as well. I think this speaks to the need. There is a strong appetite in the space. People are interested. We need to make the information readily available and support to really get this cohort and capacity to start making changes in the drug discovery space. We also have our webinar program. What's actually wonderful, our mentors, Alawali is actually one of our mentors, and we're able to, through our network, also engage them and share their knowledge more broadly. And these are open webinars that we've been running for the last 7 years or so, around about 20 a year on average. And we do put them up on our YouTube channel as well, so they are available. Separate success story actually with Wally is, I don't know whether it's through his engagements with us, but he was working in Belgium. He's since been inspired to come back to the continent, and he's just started a new job with a clinical facility in Uganda. So, you know, we're also attracting our mentors back to the continent. Shifting gears, I said I'd speak to you a bit about networks as well. What are we doing to build the network and capacity? So, very pleased to say that our partnership with the Gates Foundation has been going for a while, and that same question that Glaudina raised earlier, how do we catalyze this across the continent? The Gates Foundation had the same question for us back in 2018 and said, what can we do? And we started back then looking at seed projects that we could support. Can we have H3D Center as a hub where we can support other research institutes to start to move into the space, where they could access drug discovery assays from us or advice from us, bring their scientists to H3D if they needed to? How do we use that to catalyze this? And from those early seed projects, there were 16 in total in various African countries, we reached a point where we felt we were mature enough now to formalize into a network. So in 2023, with the Gates Foundation and LifeArc investing 7.2 million, we were able to officially form our Grand Challenges African Drug Discovery Accelerator, which we call GCADA. So as of today, we have 8 African countries participating, 23 research institutes, 37 members, and 4 flagship projects. I will emphasize here that for us, the projects are key. The projects are the glue. If we're not collaborating, if we're not working on something jointly, there's nothing to hold us together. So these Pan-African flagship projects, the scientists engaging, showing progress, developing products together, this is what's really going to help build sustainable capacity. So this is our network. This is actually in Accra earlier this year, where we all got together for our annual convening meeting. And collectively, we've articulated this vision. So our long-term vision is a future where African patients thrive from innovative drug discovery solutions tailored to their health needs. That's a little way off, but how are we going to get there? So we're going to start off by establishing a sustainable network that's going to accelerate drug discovery for unmet medical needs. And we're going to develop and retain a critical mass of talented researchers in Africa while creating globally connected regional centers of excellence that can nourish the drug discovery pipeline. I think it's important here that while we're talking about an African network, we are still a globally connected African network. We're not trying to do this without our partners in Europe or the US. We're doing it with them. But we're doing it with a focus on our continent and the medical needs here. Okay, so I said the flagship projects, this is our glue. So I'll give you a little bit of insight into some of the work that we're doing. There is a flagship project in malaria, which is led by Professor Richard Amewu in Ghana, and a co-PI, Professor Lynn Marie, University of Pretoria, or sometimes we say Stellenbosch, depending. So when she applied for this, she was still in Pretoria. And yeah. I see the trend. I see the trend. Then there's also Stellenbosch. We have a Pan-African TB project. This is mainly led from Stellenbosch and Kenya. And then we're building an African DMPK network, which is being led from Zimbabwe, from AIBST. And then there's an African-derived natural product library project being led from Cameroon, saying how can we actually put together a natural product box of all these really medically active natural products that we have on the continent and make them available for screening as starting points for different diseases. So these are more platforms that are going to help boost the drug discovery whereas the top two are more drug discovery projects aiming at specific treatments. Okay, I only have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but I did want to mention, so with our GC ADA, it's not just the projects. We're also saying, how do we get the members of that network to work and help to create something that's going to be sustainable? So this is very recent. Just within the last 2 months, we've established our 5 working groups for the network who are starting to look at, well, how do we go about fundraising for long-term security? What is our strategy for fundraising for a network like this? How do we look at the scientific content of what we're doing? Can we do a SWOT analysis of all the projects that are going on at the moment? How do we strengthen that? Are there gaps that we need to fill? We're also looking at patient advocacy and community engagement, saying how are we actually engaging with the different communities that we're supporting here? There's diaspora. We know the African diaspora is massive. We have a working group saying, how do we get the African diaspora more involved in what's going on in the continent? And then, of course, industry. And that is a whole topic of its own. Some of the big issues that we face across the continent are things like procurement of simple reagents. How are we forming partnerships with the people that are actually supplying us with the things we need to do the research? So we have a strategy around how to increase that engagement as well. Richard, I'm worried about my 1 minute warning. 1 minute, okay. So building on this, we were able to secure some funding through the EU Horizons Infrastructure Grant. And this is what we're calling the Rafiki network. So if you look, we've got GC ADA and our GC ADA partners on top. We brought in the EU funding, brought in key partners from GC ADA into that grant together with the European partners. And we're using this alliance and additional partnership to boost what we're doing at GC ADA and to help build these regional hubs and to strengthen the capacity for drug discovery. So what does that actually mean? And I've been thinking about different ways to show people how this all works. And essentially, we're building a house here. We want to build a house that's going to accelerate innovative drug discovery. And these are all just different bricks. So the ones in blue are work packages we're focusing on with Rafiki. How do we strengthen the data management at these different sites? How do we strengthen sample management so we can actually share the samples that we're making in these labs? How do we work on community engagement? How do we make sure that we have the basic pieces in place that we can do these projects? Then through GC ADA, we've got our member projects, our flagship projects, we've got fundraising, got our DMPK network and natural product box. We need all of these pieces if we're going to build something that can actually last. And you can see we've also started to say, well, what makes this network different from other networks? What are we really trying to do here? We're not just building capacity, we're actually trying to build an ecosystem for innovative drug discovery research across the continent. This means that we're translational focused. We're actually, both through GC ADA and Rafiki, we networked to industry. We want to start putting together that pipeline of scientific excellence of things that can actually go forward into the clinic and then eventually to the patients. And that is my last slide. I just thought I'd pop up some of the partners we work with. So for those of you interested to see if your institution is on here as well, these are the current members of GC ADA and the current partners in Rafiki. And these are some of the other partners that are working with H3D. Thank you.
Speakers up front here, please. We have 10 minutes. And Ambi is really testing my eyes since she sent me the smallest questions in the world. Holy moly, am I supposed to read this, girl? No, I can read it with a glass, but it's tiny. Okay. So first of all, can we have the lights, please, Tulio? So we put him to good use. So thank you very much for the 3 exceptional presentations. I think you would all agree. I think they deserve a round of applause. We've got, Tulio says 15 minutes. John needs to get back to Cape Town, so we'll see how we go. So we have 3 questions online, but for the audience, are there any questions that you would have? And we'll hand the mic around, and maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then we have 4 questions online. We'll also try and we will get to them. Anyone in the room? Okay. We'll do both questions and then we'll do the answers.
Okay, my name is Kennedy Mulung from Malawi. My question is, I understand some of these products and compounds which you develop, you're not necessarily the ones who manufacture them, but rather you engage these companies or manufacturers. So, and I know that they like manufacture for preclinical and also clinical stage. So, at which actually stage do we engage them? Is it after you have developed these compounds or products, or maybe before? Yeah, and also are they from Africa, these manufacturers? Yeah, and
Next one.
Good afternoon. I'm Harris from South Africa. So I have a real interest in your 100 genome product project and the AI aspect of it. So I just wanted to know, with entities like the FDA shifting into AI preclinical trials, are there plans for South Africa through SAPRA? Is there anything in the pipelines along those lines?
I told you there wouldn't be stupid questions. That's two great questions to start. So who's going to take that as a go first? Maybe on the drug discovery manufacturing?
I can take that one. So in fact, I told you I wouldn't speak about the strategic projects, but one of them is around manufacturing. One of the challenges that we see, particularly in small molecules at the moment, is there's almost no manufacturing happening on the continent. There are only 4 companies, 2 in South Africa, 1 in Nigeria, 1 in Egypt, that can currently manufacture active pharmaceutical ingredients. All the rest of the active pharmaceutical ingredients are imported. So when you hear about manufacturing in Africa, what you're really mainly hearing about is that finished pill formulation. You're not actually hearing about that drug substance manufacture. And that's an area that we are trying to boost. As you say, at the moment, when we need something scaled up for preclinical studies, we outsource to India or China. We need to build that capacity. We are working to, we did get a quote from CPT Pharma. We are working to build that capacity and working closely with one of the local manufacturers in Pretoria to see how we can strengthen that work here on the continent.
Can I carry on with that one? Now, on that specific thing, there is actually active pushing from the European Union as well as the Africa CDC and the African Union for local manufacturing. And I'm not talking secondary manufacturing, I'm talking API manufacturing. But as you mentioned, in South Africa, we've got 2 companies who can do that. The one is part of that network for drug discovery and development, CPT Pharma, where we're specifically looking at upscaling from your lab-based to 50 liters and then 200 liters to see whether you can actually manufacture a drug, and they do have also GMP facilities now, so they can do it. But it is one company who can actually assist, and they are associated with them. They were on there. But then also at the same time, we are looking at how to build in these capacities across Africa. I know in Nigeria, there is also upscaling of some of their facilities, but it's another 4 or 5 years before they will be actually actively. But there is a program from government side, from African Union side, on how to build that. Now, over to AI. One of the problems with the FDA using AI is the fact that the African genome is totally underrepresented. And this is one of the reasons why we have created the 110,000 human genomes. What we did, the call was out at the beginning of this year, where we asked actually for cohorts of people that we can. So where we have not only the genomic information, but that you also do have the patient record that goes with it. So it's their phenotype as well as their genotype. And then from there on, you can actually start working on where to go further. And unless we have those models in place, even the drugs discovered in Africa, we will not know whether it's actually actively involved. One of the things that we are looking at specifically is organoids that are made from African-derived livers, so that, but within that, you need for the specific areas of Africa to actually have those specific organoids as well. So we're working on it, but at the moment, even if the FDA say this thing has been AI approved in South Africa, we will say nope, First of all, we've got a HIV component where epigenetics is becoming a serious concern, where you need to take that into consideration as well. But we are busy building up the AI component and the information that goes with it.
If I can just quickly follow up on that, very nicely said, Glaudina and Harrison, yeah, to your point. I mean, we will always need experiment at the preclinical phase. There's probably never going to be a time at which we can rely exclusively on those models for the reasons that Glaudina has mentioned. But the problem is we do want to minimize the experiments from an ethical perspective. For example, we don't want to do an experiment on a mouse or a rat unless you really have to and you have a good rationale for why you need to do that. But it also requires specialist expertise as well. And not everyone all over the continent can do these experiments. So there's going to be a balance between in silico or computer generated kind of data, but in combination with experimental data as well. It needs to be a healthy and skeptical relationship between the two, I think. Will you excuse me, please?
And if there's this dodgy guy with this very loud shirt who's been in the front row taking photos, that's because you've been all over social media in the last hour, all three of you. So he's been posting and tweeting. Thank you very much, John. So we have got half a dozen questions online, and thank you very much for those who put in questions online. Some of them are quite long. And to do them justice, I think, with your permission, if I could send you some of the questions to email to respond. So maybe just to pick up from Dr. Koza, ask the question around, how can we involve social scientists in several of these processes? And I'm not sure maybe that's for Glaudina. And the second question, why do we need more malaria drugs? There are malaria drugs. That's quite a nice one, but quickly, please.
Well, you've got me. I'm a social scientist. So yes, but this is where when I looked at that specific interconnection of different technologies, and social science is actually one of them, because we need to understand how people react towards drugs, but also the systems that social science use for analyzing things is also important. So we include social sciences in all our components we were actually at in. But it might be, because I'm a social scientist, but the whole notion of transdisciplinary or disciplinarity is actually becoming more and more important in taking any discovery work within the health field.
Yep. So it's a good question. And in fact, we work very closely with Medicines for Malaria Venture. And the interesting thing about this space is the bar for new drugs gets higher each year. So, 20 years ago, what were passed for a malaria drug versus what they're asking for today is very different. And one of the reasons for that is because there are treatments available. And if we are developing a drug, it's better be better in all ways. The one big issue is obviously drug resistance. So with emerging drug resistance, we do need new treatments in the pipeline to combat that. We're looking for single dose cure. Can we give one tablet and have it cure? We also want to look at something that's going to block transmission. So when they take the pill, it's also going to immediately stop the parasite transmission, which will stop the spread. So there are a number of reasons, but really, one of our main programs at the moment is shifting away from that treatment more towards the prevention, looking at long-acting injectables to say, can we just, over the malaria season, give a single injection that's going to provide coverage for 3 months and prevent people actually even getting malaria in the first place. So our malaria strategy is shifting because the bar is being raised and because of what's already coming through in the clinical pipeline. We think that from a treatment perspective, we're reaching a point where potentially we don't need new treatments. We should look at now that long-acting prophylaxis coverage.
So we have a question from M. Changara, who, I don't know if it's a he or she, sorry. So the question is directed, it's really around, your question earlier on Dr. Google and discrediting and what can you believe? And I suppose it's a philosophical question. How do the scientists regain the edge? And do scientists go into politics or do you say no? So that is a very interesting question. I'm not sure if we can get to an answer for that one now. Oh,
No. Yes, I can try. Because here we have, for example, in our fellowship, so we have people from 16 African countries. They stay either 4 months or 12 months with us. And a big part of the training was also how to do science communication. And my answer is quite simple. More than ever, scientists need to learn how to communicate. Is the only way that we're gonna try to at least combat a little bit the misinformation. And as part of that, it's communicated science in simple terms, and also, and continues doing that, even if one is attacking the media. I don't know if Glaudina or Susan have better suggestions than me.
thank you, Chris. Thank you. So there are a very nice set of questions from Dr. Ashane Gebru. If you don't mind, we're going to reply to that online, because there's three. It's almost a half a page of background and context, and there's some really, really great questions there, which I would like to send to you, Susan, because I think you can really do it better justice in writing, because there's lots of different elements to it, which I think would be really great. So Dr. Gebru, please, we will respond to you. Thank you very much for some really, really good questions. The other question was around medic, Glaudina. You mentioned if a researcher develops a new diagnostic and the data shows that it is really beneficial either to the patient or reduce cost and spending, are there platforms available to such a person to talk to someone about it, or will there be another call for medic or SHIP around this?
It's actually a constant process. There are calls every now and then, but the whole medic is designed to test the system. So it's not only for when there's a call out for medic. So they are available on the MRC website, and just contact them.
Great. Thank you. And then the last question, I think it's the last question, is from M. Changara again. And it's a really good question, so I'd like to raise it. It's really for Susan. So it talks about collaboration. So how can we collaborate without acting as though we are threatening and someone's stealing your idea? So are there ways around that? And it's a big issue, people don't apply for grants these days because they think the reviewers are going to steal their ideas. So it's a big issue. So maybe you can have a stab at that.
It is a big issue. And in fact, even with the network that we built now, it took quite a few years to build up that trust. And I think with scientists, once they're working together and they've started doing something small together, the trust gets bigger and they pick on bigger projects and then bigger projects. And in fact, we found that with all our international partners, and we've done a lot of collaboration across the globe. Start with something small and achievable, get to know the partner, build that trust. And then, of course, you need to rely on your legal officers to put in place a decent IP sharing agreements to govern what's going forward. I think for the most part, luckily, stealing of ideas, at least in our space and in our community, has been very small. I think there's one or two examples of it, but it generally, people are working in good faith with appropriate legal agreements behind it. And really, we're working in the global health space. There's not a lot of money to be made here. We're really doing it to address the needs on the continent. And I think in that space, there is more sharing. There's more of this pre-competitive. How do we work together? How do we collectively solve these global challenges? Even the consortium that John showed, the TB Drug Accelerator, you would have seen that there are all sorts of pharma companies there, as well as academic groups there. And they're all working together, disclosing what they're working on within that consortium, saying, we're working on this series. And if someone else is like, hang on, we're also working on that target. Should we work together? Or, okay, let you take that one forward. We don't want to duplicate what you're doing. We're going to focus on something else. So within consortium like this, you can create frameworks that support a more pre-competitive, let's work together. Our end goal of helping patients is at least aligned.
I'm going to close the session up. Maybe one last question. Susan, the countries you are working in for your accelerator program in Africa, the networks: Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, Cameroon. Who's from those countries in the audience? Stand up. Stand up, those from those countries. If you're interested in malaria or TB or precision medicine or drug discovery in those countries, and you want to close the loop, that's part of why we're here. So you need to find out who's doing things in your country. So thank you very much. Sorry, guys, to call on you. So that's the end of the first seminar, guys. Thank you very much to the speakers, HVD, Susan, and John, and Glaudina, as always. The role of government in Africa is critical, guys. Someone needs to buy your product. Somebody needs to regulate your market. Somebody needs to get the right kind of pieces in place. Governments are central in Africa. You cannot get around them. You have to work with them. So if you're looking to innovate or get products into the market, you need to work with them. H3D is probably the flagship example from the South African government on how you build from a 2 postdoc program to 78 or 75 researchers with 90% PhDs or masters, starting small and growing, and shows you how it can be done. And it's not a South African program anymore. It's a Pan-African program involving multiple partners and the private sector as well. So if you are happy, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, Susan, do you mind if we give them your email address? But thank you very much for those online, about 120 people, 130 people in the audience. Until we meet next week for the next seminar. Thank you very much, everyone.